Daniel stood in front of Victoria with tears running down his face. The same man who had stolen from her. The same man who had laughed while others humiliated her. The same man who had once told her she would never amount to anything. Now he was standing at her door, broken, hollow, begging. His company was gone. His fortune had vanished overnight. His reputation had been shredded so completely that even his own name felt like an insult. And the friends he thought would never leave him had disappeared faster than smoke in the wind. He had lost everything. And the only person left in the world who might still care whether he lived or died was the woman he had destroyed. Victoria looked at him for a long moment. Then she walked slowly to a cabinet in the corner of the room, opened it, and pulled out a pair of fighting gloves. She placed them on the table between them. Then she looked directly into his eyes and said 7 words. 7 words that made the 3 assistants standing behind her freeze in place. "Beat me first, Daniel. Then we'll talk." Daniel stared at the gloves. Then he stared at her. The room was completely silent. And then one of the assistants laughed. Just once. A small, nervous laugh quickly swallowed by the tension. But Victoria wasn't smiling. She wasn't joking. And what was about to happen over the next several months would expose a secret so deeply buried, so carefully hidden, that when it finally surfaced it would not just change Daniel's life. It would rewrite everything he thought he knew about his own story. Stay until the very end. Because the final revelation changes everything. Before we dive deeper into this story, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click the subscribe button right now so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Stories like this one drop every week and you do not want to be left behind. Now let's go back to the beginning. Because to understand what Victoria meant by those 7 words, you have to understand what Daniel did to her. And to understand what Daniel did to her, you have to understand who they were before the world corrupted them both. They met years ago through a mutual friend at a small business gathering. Daniel was young, sharp, and completely magnetic. He had this energy about him that pulled people in without effort. He spoke with conviction. He moved with purpose. And when he looked at you, it felt like you were the only person in the room. Victoria was different, quieter, more watchful. She didn't chase attention. She observed. She studied. She asked the kinds of questions that made people pause before answering. When Daniel first approached her that evening, she didn't fall for his charm immediately. "You talk a lot," she told him plainly. He laughed, surprised. "Most people find that appealing." "Most people aren't paying close enough attention," she replied. That was the moment Daniel became fascinated by her. They built a friendship slowly, then something deeper, then eventually a life together. Daniel's career was already rising, but Victoria quietly contributed in ways that most people around them never noticed. She gave him direction when he was scattered. She gave him patience when he was reckless. She gave him perspective when his ambition started outrunning his wisdom. And she gave him something else, something he didn't discover until much, much later. But we'll get to that. For years, the partnership worked. Their professional lives grew. Their personal connection deepened. And for a time, Daniel was genuinely a good man. Imperfect, certainly. Stubborn, absolutely. But there was a core of decency in him back then that made his eventual betrayal all the more devastating. Because when greed arrived, it didn't come all at once. Came slowly, like a fog. It started with small compromises, cutting corners on contracts, taking slightly more credit than was fair, letting other people absorb consequences that should have been his to carry. Then the compromises grew larger. The corners he cut became edges. The credit he stole became entire projects. And the people absorbing his consequences included the woman standing right beside him. Victoria noticed. She confronted him privately, multiple times, with patience, with evidence, with love. Daniel dismissed every conversation. "You're overthinking it. This is how business works. You wouldn't understand." And then the moment that truly broke something between them happened publicly. At an industry gathering surrounded by colleagues and partners, someone raised a question about a failed project that had cost several smaller investors significant money. Eyes turned toward Daniel. And Daniel, without hesitation, without a single flicker of remorse, pointed at Victoria. "That was her decision," he said smoothly. "I advised against it from the beginning. The room accepted it." Victoria did not react in that moment. She simply went very still, and something behind her eyes closed like a door shutting quietly in an empty house. The separation that followed was not dramatic. There were no screaming matches, no thrown objects, no spectacular public confrontation. Victoria simply, methodically, and with devastating precision began separating her interests from his. Legally, financially, professionally. Daniel barely noticed at first. He was too busy enjoying what he thought was the peak of his success. But Victoria had seen the cracks forming beneath the foundation long before he had. She had already anticipated what was coming. Because that was what she did. She saw things others missed. She prepared for futures other people hadn't even imagined yet. When Daniel's empire finally collapsed, it collapsed completely. Fraudulent contracts surfaced. Misappropriated funds were traced back to accounts connected to his name. Former partners came forward. Former allies disappeared. The same media that had celebrated him spent 3 weeks systematically dismantling his reputation with the kind of gleeful efficiency that only happens when someone powerful falls from a great height. Daniel spent 6 months in a state of paralysis. He refused to admit it was over. He fired lawyers and hired new ones. He threatened journalists. He called in favors from people who no longer owed him anything. He raged privately. He crumbled publicly. And slowly, as the months accumulated and the walls continued closing in, something happened to Daniel that had never happened to him before. He ran out of excuses, not because his circumstances forced him to stop making them, but because one evening, sitting alone in a nearly empty apartment that bore almost no resemblance to the life he had once occupied, Daniel looked at his reflection in a dark window and genuinely could not find a single person to blame except the man staring back at him. That was a night he would never forget. He wept for the first time in years. Not from self-pity, from clarity. And when morning came, he made a decision. He was going to Victoria. He stood outside her office building for almost 20 minutes before he walked through the door. The reception area was clean and understated. Nothing flashy. Nothing designed to impress. Just quiet competence radiating from every corner of the space. A woman at the front desk looked up. "I'm here to see Victoria," Daniel said. "Is she expecting you?" "No," he admitted. The receptionist looked at him for a moment with no readable expression. Then she picked up a phone. 3 minutes later Daniel was guided into a conference room and told to wait. He waited for 45 minutes. He deserved every one of them. When Victoria finally entered the room, she looked exactly as she always had. Put together, calm, present. She sat across from him and folded her hands on the table and looked at him with an expression that was neither warm nor cold, just watchful. "Why are you here, Daniel?" she asked. He had rehearsed an answer. He had prepared a speech. He had planned exactly how he would phrase his apology, how he would frame his request, how he would make sure she understood the sincerity of what he was about to say. None of it came out. Instead he just said, "I'm sorry." She didn't respond. "I'm not here to make excuses. I'm not here to negotiate. I know what I did. I know how badly I treated you. I know you had every right to walk away, and I know you owe me absolutely nothing." His voice cracked slightly on the last word. He pressed through it. "But I'm asking anyway. Not because I deserve your help, because I have nowhere else to go. And you were always the only person who actually saw me clearly." Silence settled into the room like something physical. Victoria studied him for what felt like a very long time. Then she stood, walked to the cabinet in the corner, and returned with the gloves. She placed them on the table. "One fight," she said. "You win, I help you rebuild. No conditions. No limits." Daniel looked at the gloves, then at her. "Victoria, I'm not going to fight you. Then you're free to leave." "That's not, you're serious." "I'm always serious, Daniel. You just never paid close enough attention." He reached out slowly and picked up the gloves. "One fight," he repeated. One fight. He almost smiled. Not from confidence. From the sheer absurdity of sitting in a conference room being challenged to a physical contest by the woman he had wronged. How hard can it be? He thought. He would spend the next several months learning exactly how wrong that thought was. The first training session Daniel arranged almost ended in humiliation before it began. He hired a personal trainer recommended by a former associate. Young, fit, certified in 3 disciplines. After watching Daniel move for 40 minutes, the trainer put down his clipboard. "Look," the trainer said carefully. "Years of sedentary work has really compromised your baseline. We'd need to start from almost zero." "How long?" Daniel asked. "To be genuinely competitive against someone with real combat training?" "Honestly," the trainer paused. "I'm not sure this is realistic." Daniel fired him. He hired someone else. That trainer lasted 2 weeks before citing scheduling conflicts that were obviously excuses. The third one was more blunt. "You're too old, too out of shape, and too proud to take instruction," the man said on their last session. "Until you fix the last one, the first 2 don't matter." Daniel sat alone in the gym after that session with his hands on his knees and sweat dripping onto the floor. He was 41 years old. His body, which had once carried real military conditioning from years earlier in his life, felt like it belonged to a stranger. Every muscle he had neglected had quietly staged a rebellion. His endurance was embarrassing. His reflexes had grown slow. Even his hands, which had once been fast enough to impress real instructors, moved like he was wearing weights. He put his face in his hands. And then someone sat down beside him on the bench. An old man. Small, lean, wearing clothes that looked like they had survived several decades. He had a face like carved wood and eyes that were completely, unervingly still. "They all quit on you," the old man said. It wasn't a question. Daniel looked at him. "Who are you?" "Someone who can get you ready." "Ready for what?" "You don't know what I'm preparing for." The old man tilted his head slightly. "You're preparing to fight someone who is better than you. Someone you've underestimated. And you have approximately 4 months before you have to stand in front of her and prove that you've changed." Daniel went very still. "How do you know it's a woman?" The old man stood up. "Training starts tomorrow. 4 in the morning. Don't be late. And don't bring your pride. There's no room for it where we're going." He walked away before Daniel could ask another question. That night Daniel lay awake trying to make sense of it. He almost didn't show up the next morning. But something pulled him there. And what followed was the most painful, humiliating, and ultimately transformative experience of his adult life. The old coach, who gave no full name and accepted no argument, began by doing something no previous trainer had done. He made Daniel be still. For the first 3 days, there was no sparring, no conditioning, no drills. Just stillness. Sitting. Breathing. Watching. "You don't know how to be present," the coach told him on the first day. "You're always 10 steps ahead, planning, calculating, managing. That's why people can read you. That's why you lose before the fight starts." "This isn't a philosophy class," Daniel said. The coach looked at him without expression. "Lie down." "What?" "Lie on the floor. On your back." Daniel stared at him. "You want to be prepared? You start by learning what it feels like to be completely without defense. Because that's where your character lives. Not in your victories. In your flaws." Reluctantly, feeling absurd, Daniel lay on the cold floor. He stared at the ceiling. "What am I supposed to be doing?" he asked. "Listening," the coach said. "To everything you've been running from." And in the silence of that empty gym at 4 in the morning, with nothing but the distant sound of the world outside, Daniel heard it. The voice inside himself that he had silenced with money and momentum and carefully constructed arrogance said simply, "You know what you did." He closed his eyes, and for the first time in longer than he could remember, he let himself feel it. By the second week, the physical training began, and it was merciless. The coach worked him in ways that bypassed every vanity Daniel carried. There were no impressive movements, no techniques designed to look powerful. Everything was fundamental, painful, honest. Daniel's ribs took impact after impact during controlled sparring with the coach's assistants. His legs gave out during conditioning runs. His hands blistered, healed, and blistered again. One morning after a particularly brutal session, Daniel sat against the wall breathing in ragged pulls. His lips split and his left eye slightly swollen from a sparring round that had not gone in his favor. "Why are you doing this to me?" he asked. The coach sat across from him, calm as always. "You think I'm doing something to you? I think you're enjoying watching me suffer. I'm watching you learn the difference between suffering and growth. You've confused them your whole life. When things were hard, you called it suffering. When things were comfortable, you called it growth. You had them backwards." Daniel said nothing. "Tell me about Victoria," the coach said suddenly. The shift in topic caught Daniel off guard. "What about her? What was she like when you first met her?" Daniel was quiet for a moment. "Honest. Uncommonly honest. She never said things to make you feel good. She said things because they were true. And that made you uncomfortable. It made me feel seen." Which was uncomfortable, yes. "And when she became inconvenient to your ambitions?" Daniel looked at the floor. "I erased her," he said quietly. "I made her small in front of people who respected her so that their respect would shift to me instead. I used her as a shield for my failures and as a shadow for my successes." He paused. "I knew exactly what I was doing. That's the part one can't forgive myself for. I knew." The coach was silent for a long time. Then he said, "Your biggest weakness isn't your body." Daniel looked up. "It's the woman you betrayed." The words landed with a weight that had nothing to do with their volume. "Not because she makes you weak," the coach continued. "Because you can't face her clearly until you face what you took from her. And until you can face that, every punch you throw will carry the weight of a man still running from himself." Daniel felt something crack inside his chest. Not pain. Recognition. If you're still watching up to now, type, "I'm still here" in the comments section. Because what's coming next is the part of this story that nobody saw coming. And we want to know that you're here for it. The months that followed were unlike anything Daniel had experienced. He stopped hiring people to manage his image online. He stopped tracking what people were saying about him. He put away his phone for the first 3 hours of every morning and gave those hours entirely to the work of becoming someone different. He bled in that gym. Literally. There was one sparring session where a practice blow opened a cut above his eyebrow and blood ran freely into his eye for the rest of the round, and the coach told him to keep moving. And Daniel kept moving. Not because he wasn't in pain, but because stopping felt like a choice he no longer had the right to make. Victoria remained completely silent throughout this entire period. No calls. No messages. No updates passed through any intermediary. She had set the terms, and she was waiting on the other side of them like a door that would only open when he had truly earned the right to knock. That silence became its own kind of teacher. In it, Daniel thought about every conversation he had dismissed, every warning he had ignored, every moment where she had tried to reach him and he had chosen comfort over truth. He thought about the gathering where he had pointed at her. He thought about the look on her face in that moment, how she had gone completely still. He thought about that look every single morning when the alarm pulled him out of sleep at 3:45. It kept him moving on the days when everything in him wanted to stop. Meanwhile, the world continued to discuss his downfall with great enthusiasm. A particularly cruel piece was published online describing him as a cautionary tale about ambition without integrity. A former business associate gave an interview that included details so humiliating that people who had been sympathetic to him before stopped being sympathetic entirely. Daniel read it once. Then he set it down and went back to training. This was new behavior for a man who had once spent enormous energy managing how he appeared to other people. And the coach noticed. "You didn't react," the coach said the morning after the article appeared. "No. Why not?" Daniel thought about it genuinely before answering. "Because the article didn't say anything untrue, and I've spent enough of my life defending untrue versions of myself." The coach studied him for a moment. Something in the old man's face shifted. Just slightly. Just enough for Daniel to notice. "What?" Daniel asked. The coach shook his head. "Nothing. Let's work. But something had changed in the energy between them. Something the coach was no longer working to conceal. Daniel filed it away, because something had been bothering him for weeks. Something familiar. The coach had a habit of using specific phrases during corrections. Not just the phrases themselves, but the rhythm of them. The exact cadence. The particular way he sequenced instruction. Control your breathing before you control your hands. You're not fighting your opponent. You're fighting your own anticipation. Stillness is not the absence of movement. It is the command of it. These were not generic coaching phrases. Daniel had heard them before. Not from this old man. From somewhere deeper in his memory. From years ago. During a period of his life he rarely discussed. The night before the fight Daniel could not sleep. He lay in the same position the coach had put him in on the very first day. Flat on his back. Eyes open. Listening. He wasn't afraid of losing. He had already lost so much that one more loss had stopped frightening him the way it once had. What he was afraid of was something harder to name. He was afraid of standing in front of Victoria and still not being good enough in the ways that actually mattered. He could train his body. He had done that. He could build discipline. He had built it. He could learn to breathe through pain and stay present in chaos and quiet the noise of his own ego. He had learned all of it. But he couldn't undo what he had done to her. And he wasn't sure that any amount of training or transformation could bridge that particular distance. He thought about this until the room began to lighten with early morning, and then he got up, dressed carefully, and went to face whatever was waiting. The venue was not what he expected. It wasn't a public arena. It wasn't staged for spectacle. It was a large private space, simply arranged, with a proper training floor and clean lighting. But there were people there. Colleagues of Victoria's. A few faces Daniel recognized from his former professional life. And standing near the edge of the space was his old coach. Hands folded. Expression unreadable. Victoria stood at the center of the floor. She was wearing training clothes. No jewelry. Hair pulled back. She looked completely relaxed in a way that professional fighters look relaxed before a bout. Not the relaxation of someone unbothered. The relaxation of someone utterly prepared. Daniel walked to the center and stood across from her. For a long moment they just looked at each other. And something moved through Daniel in that moment that he had no language for. Grief, maybe. Gratitude. The complicated ache of looking at someone you damaged and seeing that they survived it better than you expected them to, and feeling proud of them and ashamed of yourself simultaneously. You actually showed up, Victoria said quietly. I always intended to. No, she said without cruelty. You intended to find an easier way around this. But there wasn't one. He nodded. There wasn't. She put on her gloves. He put on his. And they began. What happened in the first minutes surprised everyone watching. Daniel was good. Not just compared to what people expected from a man who had spent years behind a desk. He was genuinely, technically good. His footwork was controlled. His defense was disciplined. His combinations were clean and measured. The crowd murmured with something close to impressed. Victoria moved with him carefully, testing him, measuring him. And she seemed to like what she was finding. Not in a competitive sense. In the way a teacher looks at a student who has finally mastered something difficult. Daniel began to feel the first dangerous whispers of confidence. He pressed forward. He landed a sequence of clean, precise movements that had the watching crowd genuinely reacting. And then Victoria began to talk. Not taunting him. Not trying to distract him. Teaching him. In real time. During the fight. You're dropping your left shoulder before you move right, she said, deflecting a combination with almost no effort. Don't telegraph. Daniel adjusted. Tried again. Better. But you're holding your breath when you anticipate contact. That's going to slow your recovery. He stared at her. Why are you telling me how to beat you? Am I? She asked simply. He came again. Faster, tighter, incorporating everything she just said. And for a moment, genuinely, he was reaching her. Then she said something that stopped him completely. Control your breathing before you control your hands. The words hit Daniel's ears, and his entire body went cold. Because it wasn't just the phrase. It was the voice underneath the phrase. The stripped-away, focused, absolutely precise quality of that voice. He had heard that voice before. Not from an old man in a gym at 4 in the morning. From further back. Much further back. From the period of his military training when a mysterious coach had been brought in to work with a select group of elite recruits. A coach who wore full concealment during every session. Who communicated through a modified voice system. Who was known by a single name. The Ghost. Daniel took a step back. His hands dropped. Not from defeat. From the earthquake moving through everything he thought he knew. Victoria lowered her gloves. She looked at him steadily. And in her eyes he saw it. The calm certainty of someone who had been waiting a very long time for this particular moment of recognition. "You were the Ghost," he said. His voice came out barely above a whisper. "You trained us. Years ago. During the advanced program. You were the instructor nobody could identify. The one they said had trained more elite operatives than anyone in a generation." He shook his head slowly. "I spent 2 years wondering who you were. 2 years. And you were standing next to me the whole time." Victoria said nothing. Because nothing needed to be said. The truth was already assembling itself in Daniel's mind like a structure that had always been there. Invisible until now. Everything he had built his career on. The discipline. The ability to read rooms. The instincts under pressure. The capacity to outmaneuver people who had more resources and more connections. All of it had roots. Roots that went back to a training program he had attended before his professional life began. Roots that connected directly to the woman he had spent years diminishing. She had helped create him. Before she ever knew his name. And then life had placed them in the same world, the same business, eventually the same life together. And he had taken everything she gave him in that new context too. Her insight, her patience, her strategic mind, her belief in him. And then he had used her as a scapegoat and walked away. The woman whose teaching had given him his greatest tools. Twice. He should have moved. He should have reset and continued the match and let his body carry him through what his mind could no longer process. But he was frozen. And Victoria, with the calm efficiency of someone who had truly mastered her craft, closed the distance between them and ended the fight in 3 movements so clean and precise that even the people watching who had been cheering for Daniel could only exhale. Daniel went to one knee. Then slowly, carefully, he lowered himself to the mat. And lay there, staring at the ceiling. The room was completely quiet. Victoria stood over him. And for the longest moment nobody moved. Then Daniel's face did something it hadn't done in public since he was a young man. It broke. Not from the physical defeat. From everything he finally understood. The tears came without drama. Without noise. Just quietly, the way truth arrives when you've stopped fighting it. "I'm sorry," he said to the ceiling. Then he turned his head and looked at her. "I am genuinely, completely sorry. Not because I need something from you. Not because I'm trying to earn my way back into your life. But because what I did to you was wrong and I knew it was wrong while I was doing it and I did it anyway. And you deserved better than that. You deserved better than me. And I wasted years that I can't give back." The crowd expected Victoria to accept the moment as victory. They expected some version of satisfaction. Instead she crouched down and offered him her hand. He looked at it. Then he took it. She helped him stand. And when he was upright she looked at him for a moment with something in her eyes that wasn't forgiveness exactly, but was something close to its beginning. "You failed the fight," she said. Daniel nodded. "I know. But you passed the lesson." He looked at her quietly. "The challenge was never about winning," she said. "I didn't design this to humiliate you or to prove something to an audience. I designed it to find out whether the man who had the potential to be extraordinary was still somewhere inside the man who chose to become ordinary. Ordinary men use people. Ordinary men are afraid of accountability. Ordinary men run." She paused. "You didn't run." "I ran for a long time," he said. "Yes, and then you stopped. That's the part that matters." She looked at him steadily. "I'll help you rebuild. Not because you deserve it yet. But because I believe you're finally willing to do the work of becoming someone who does." He couldn't speak for a moment. Why? He finally managed. After everything. Why? Victoria was quiet. Then she said, because I spent my whole life seeing clearly what others couldn't see yet. I saw potential in frightened recruits before they saw it in themselves. I saw it in you before we ever met officially. And I saw it hiding underneath all that damage you became. She tilted her head. I don't give second chances easily. But I give them when I genuinely believe they'll be used correctly. How do you know I will be? I don't, she said simply. That part is up to you. The old coach was still standing at the edge of the room. He hadn't moved. He was watching Daniel with the quiet satisfaction of someone who had finished a long and complicated piece of work. Daniel crossed the room and stood in front of him. You knew, Daniel said. From the beginning. You knew who she was. The coach nodded once. You arranged this. The coach said nothing. Who are you? Daniel asked. The old man reached into his jacket and produced a sealed envelope. He held it out without a word. Daniel took it. His hands were steady as he opened it. Inside was a single photograph. Old. The edges softened with time. The kind of photograph that has lived in a drawer for years and carries the weight of everything that happened after it was taken. The image showed a training space. And in it, unmistakably, was a much younger Daniel, moving through a drill with the focused intensity of someone being shaped into something he could not yet see in himself. And behind a one-way observation window, barely visible but absolutely present, stood a figure, watching, taking careful notes on a small pad. A young woman who even in a blurry photograph held herself with the particular stillness of someone who sees everything and reveals nothing. Victoria. Long before fate placed them in the same life. Long before he knew her name. Long before he had the opportunity to betray what she had built in him. She had already been watching. Already been guiding. Already been protecting someone who didn't even know she existed. Daniel stared at the photograph for a very long time. His eyes filled slowly. He did not blink them clear. He let the tears come. On the back of the photograph was a sentence written in the same careful handwriting he would have recognized anywhere by now. The strongest warriors are not the ones who never fall. They are the ones who rise after learning why they fell. He read it twice. He read it a third time. And everything, every conversation, every lesson, every phrase delivered at 4 in the morning in an empty gym, every correction spoken across years and disguises and distances he had not been able to measure until this moment, assembled itself into a single coherent truth. Victoria had never wanted revenge. She had wanted transformation. She had spent years, quietly and without recognition, investing in the possibility that the man he could become was still reachable from the man he had allowed himself to become. For the first time in longer than he could honestly account for, Daniel felt peace settle into him the way sunlight settles into a room that has been dark for too long. Real peace. Not the absence of difficulty. Not the exhaustion that sometimes masquerades as calm. But the particular peace of a person who finally understands the shape of their own story. He looked up to tell the old coach what the photograph meant to him. But the space where the man had been standing was empty. He was gone. As quietly and completely as someone who had only ever existed as long as he was needed and had known precisely when that need was finished. Daniel stood holding the photograph. And then Victoria's phone vibrated. The sound was small. Ordinary. The kind of notification that interrupts hundreds of moments every day without consequence. But something about this one made Victoria stop. She looked at the screen, and the calm disappeared from her face. Not gradually. Not in the slow way that emotion moves through a composed person. All at once, like a light being switched off. The old coach, who had not entirely gone, who was still visible at the very edge of the doorway, noticed immediately. He turned back. "What is it?" he asked. Victoria did not answer. She looked at the screen for another long moment. Then she turned and held the phone out to Daniel. Slowly. The way you hand something to a person when you are not certain they are ready for what it contains. Daniel took it. He looked down. The message was simple. Almost insultingly simple for the weight it carried. A single photograph. Taken hours earlier from the quality of the light and the angle. A woman standing beside a luxury black vehicle on a street Daniel did not recognize. Her posture was straight. Her face was turned slightly away from the camera, but not enough. Not nearly enough. Sabrina. And she was not alone. Standing beside her, one hand resting on the roof of the vehicle with the casual ease of someone completely at home in expensive spaces, was a man. A man Daniel had not seen in years. A man whose name, even unspoken, landed in his chest like a stone dropped into deep water. He was older than Daniel remembered, heavier in the face, but the particular quality of his stillness, the way power arranged itself around this specific person in every room he occupied, was absolutely unchanged. He was the man who had moved quietly in the background of Daniel's professional rise, pulling strings whose other ends Daniel had never fully traced. The man whose name surfaced briefly in the aftermath of the corporate scandal before disappearing again with the practiced efficiency of someone who had spent decades perfecting the art of not being accountable for things he had arranged. The man who, at the height of everything falling apart, had been heard by exactly 2 people to say that Victoria would pay for the inconvenience her precision had caused him. Neither of those 2 people had taken it as seriously as they should have. Attached to the photograph was a message. 6 words. Just 6 words. This time, I'm coming personally. The room was silent. Daniel lifted his eyes slowly from the screen. Victoria was already looking toward the window. Her posture had changed completely. The generous, patient mentor who had stood in this space and offered second chances and spoken about transformation and offered her hand to a man lying on a mat. She was still present, but something had moved to the front of her. Something older. Something trained. The strategist had returned. The warrior had returned. And for the first time since the moment he had walked to the center of that floor and put on gloves, Daniel realized with a clarity that arrived like cold water that the fight he had just survived, the months of training and suffering and transformation and revelation, was not the destination. It had been preparation. The real battle had not yet begun. Because somewhere out there, with a powerful and dangerous man standing beside a luxury vehicle in evening light, Sabrina was coming back. And this time she was not coming alone. And this time, based on the expression on Victoria's face and the 6 words on that screen, the person they were coming for had already begun calculating. Thank you so much for watching all the way to this moment. It genuinely means everything. Now we want to hear from you. What do you think Sabrina is planning? Has she changed in the time since she left that venue with her composure held together by sheer force of will? Or is she preparing something far more calculated, the ultimate revenge against the woman she has chosen to blame for everything? And what about the man beside her? The one whose name nobody said out loud in that room but everyone understood? Let us know in the comments exactly what you think is coming next. Because in the next story, Victoria and Daniel may be forced to do something neither of them expected. Fight on the same side, against an enemy far more dangerous than either of them has faced alone. The strongest warriors are not the ones who never fall. They are the ones who rise after learning why they fell. To be continued. And if you are not subscribed yet, click that button right now. Because when part 2 of the story drops, you will not want to find out you missed it. We will see you in the next one.